What's good, y'all? Coming at you with our first video, recapping a weekend that was in college football. It was a great weekend. There was a lot of action and movement across the country. Certainly, as we think about our top 5 picks, we got off to a really great start, going 4-1. We hit on Tulsa plus 11.5, which was an outright winner at Oklahoma State. Truly, Oklahoma State is that bad. It's going to be interesting to see what the line is this week against Baylor. We hit on Maryland. Maryland crept up to plus 10 underdog going into Madison and playing the Badgers, and Maryland dominated that game. It's not looking good for Luke Fickell as Badgers head coach. And then, of course, we had Syracuse, who, even despite an extremely long lightning delay down at Clemson in Death Valley, was able to pull out the win as a 17.5-point underdog. Some books even had them at plus 18 when the game closed. Now, unfortunately, Syracuse lost Steve Angeli, their transfer quarterback from Notre Dame, who's been playing so well, is one of the top passers in the country. It looks like he is going to be out for potentially the rest of the season. Definitely won't be playing in the basketball matchup with Duke this week. But it was really great to see those 3 double-digit underdogs all not just cover, but win outright. Tulane, unfortunately, was not able to do the same, getting trounced 45-10 at Ole Miss. Ultimately, Tulane had a bunch of possessions early in the game where they just couldn't convert and couldn't get those, 1 or 2 yards that they needed to keep drives moving, and Ole Miss ran away with it. But hey, you know what? 3 out of 4 of the double-digit dogs ain't bad. And then when you throw in the University of Washington, which gave up more points to Washington State than I was expecting, but still covered by 35, won by 35 and covered the spread by a couple of touchdowns. That was exactly what we were looking to see. The UW offense looked really special. Damon Williams was, a really masterful operator of that offense, both on the ground and through the air. He throws a beautiful ball. 4-1 in our first week, not bad. We also gave you a game day pick as a quick post, UNLV minus 2.5. UNLV was able to orchestrate their biggest comeback in years under Dan Mullen. Those of you who remember Dan Mullen, he was Florida's head coach for a number of years. He's replacing Barry Odom, who orchestrated his own great turnaround at UNLV the last couple of years before bolting to Purdue this year. So it was a big win for Dan Mullen to come out and pull out that win, 41-38, at the very tail end of that game, and gave us another checkbox on the board. Others receiving votes, not so great. They were a total miss this week, but that's why they didn't crack the top 5, right? All right, so additional notes. Nebraska, not there yet under Matt Rule. Michigan was all Justice Haynes. He was crazy on the ground. Michigan's rush offense was just absolutely dominating. And Bryce Underwood played a role in that, but Bryce Underwood is not lighting anything up through the air. And if Michigan's going to be a real threat this year, they've got to have a legitimate passing game with Bryce Underwood. Now, he's just a freshman, #1 recruit in the country. He's got a long ways to go, and he's got a lot of runway to get there this year, but he's got to improve. Miami is looking really legit. Seems like some folks have Miami as the #1 team in the playoff seeding at this point. Look, I think Florida is going to turn out not to be as good as we thought they were. I think Miami's win over the weekend is impressive, there's no doubt, but I'm still not entirely convinced that Miami is a legitimate top 3 team. We'll talk about that a little bit more, but Mario Cristobal is a coach that I still don't trust. Former Ducks coach, he's an incredible recruiter. He'll recruit those 5-star guys, but he makes some really questionable decisions, especially when it comes to time management, timeouts, really late game play calling. So, we'll see. Consider me a fade Miami when it comes down to some of those, those kind of bigger games like Florida State, and then potentially if they get to the playoff. Notre Dame finally got a win. I felt bad for Purdue bettors, certainly over a 2-hour lightning delay, and it looked like Purdue was going to at least keep pace with Notre Dame enough to cover the 26.5. And then after that lightning delay, when the teams finally came back out, Notre Dame kept pushing on offense, and Purdue just seemed flat. Conversely, the USC offense was anything but flat. Jordan Maiava, I got that name right, Mikel Lemon are an incredible quarterback wide receiver duo. The run game looked really strong. I think USC is for real. Not just because they were able to put up so many points last week, but when we look forward to Illinois, Illinois just got trounced by a really dynamic Indiana offense where Fernando Mendoza, the Cal transfer, had 5 touchdowns. I think that Jordan Maava could have a similar week this week. Could he go for 6 touchdowns? USC is only a 4.5-point favorite. I understand that it's at Illinois. You'd think that Illinois would have a bounce back. I'm not super convinced that Brett Bielema is going to be able to drive that bounce back. And I just think USC's offense is too much. Indiana's offense was too much, and I think USC is going to be too much. So we'll get into that a little bit more. But, first kind of lean of this week is USC minus 4.5. As we look at top 25 movement before we get into this week's games, like I said, the Canes are up to number 2 in the top 25 from number 4. Penn State, who we'll talk about, down to number 3 from number 2, and LSU's moved down the slot as well to number 4 from number 3 to make room for the Canes. Oklahoma has jumped up from 11 to 7 on the back of beating Auburn and their own former quarterback, Arnold, at home. And Texas has moved down from 8 to 10, despite a 55-0 win over Sam Houston State. So, not that much movement in the top 10, but certainly there's a lot of confidence in Miami right now. Indiana rightfully jumping up 8 spots from 19 to 11. I'm almost surprised that they didn't move up a couple more than that. They were incredibly impressive, but they've got a big follow-up opportunity this week against Iowa. I think that Indiana, if they trounce Iowa, and look, you look at Iowa gave up 28 points at Rutgers. The defense does not look like the sternest Iowa defense we've seen. And while I think the offense can score, I don't know that they can keep up with Indiana. But I think Indiana is going to have another big week, and then they'll move into the top 10 as a result. And then finally, Texas Tech, very incredible showing in Salt Lake at Utah. Utah had a lot of hype coming into this season. They looked really good in their first few games. Texas Tech was one of the most active teams in the portal. They've spent a ton of money. The first few games was all offense, all the focus on the offense, not really playing anybody of note. Against Utah, the defense showed up. They really caused Utah to struggle. Utah's offense looked like the Utah of old, those Cam Rising years where, they would have these flashes, but then they would also go quarters on end where they just couldn't move the ball. That's what we saw this week, Texas Tech running away with it. And then finally, kind of as a nod to the game that we'll talk about last, Bama is dropping from 14 to 17 ahead of their battle with Georgia, having a bye last week. So bit of movement in the top 10, bit of movement in the top 25. And as we look forward to this week, some games that I'm tracking as we think about picks for this week. The first one is Florida State minus 4.5 at UVA on Friday. Look, UVA has the ability to score some points. I've been looking at their schedule and their performances. I would call them a soft 3-1. Their North Carolina State road loss isn't a terrible one, but their Stanford and William & Mary wins are not great either. FSU's been averaging 58 points per game, including the Bama game where they put up 31 on Bama. If FSU, who I believe is on a mission this year after last year's debacle of a campaign, I think that FSU is going to do everything they can to blow out as many opponents as possible this year and get back to a place of prominence. I think that that's going to continue at UVA, and FSU is going to win big. So lean there, strong lean. TCU at Arizona State, I think that's an interesting one. Arizona State coming back home after a really gritty win at Baylor on a last-second field goal. TCU won their game last week at SMU, the final Iron Skillet game, a year after getting 66 hung on them by SMU. I have a slight lean to ASU here in the desert. I'm going to be watching this game a little bit. It's going to be interesting to see how the injury reports unfold. But I really like Sam Leavitt and the Sun Devils, and I'm going to be tracking this game closely. I talked a little bit about USC. That's a game that we're going to be watching. I had on the docket Duke at Syracuse, fun matchup of the basketball schools. Duke obviously with a big resurgence last week after some really disappointing performances to start the year, looking more like the Duke they were projected to be in beating North Carolina State by double digits. Syracuse, of course, coming off of that big win against Clemson. Are they due for a letdown game? And then we find out about Steve Angeli. Can Ricky Collins fill Steve Angeli's shoes? We'll see. Can he get the ball to Jonte Cook, who's been looking like a legitimate college #1 wide receiver? We'll see. This game goes off the board as a result. If Steve Angeli was playing in this game, I think the Darian Mensah-Steve Angeli battle would have been a really interesting one, but certainly becomes a lot less interesting when a backup quarterback is set to start for Q's. Probably the game that I'm most excited about this week in terms of lean is UCF plus 5.5. Scott Frost, former Oregon coaching staff member, obviously Nebraska great, went back to Nebraska for a coaching stint that didn't go so well. He's back at UCF, where he had driven the UCF program to a state of real prominence in Florida. And he's got them rolling this year under dual threat, quarterback Taven Johnson. Messed that up twice. Let's try that again. UCF is rolling under Frost and dual threat quarterback Taven Jackson. They stomped the UNC Belichick's from the jump last week, and they never let up. KState, on the other side, is a very talented team. Their quarterback, another dual threat, and Avery Johnson, very talented, very highly hyped coming into this year, kind of a dark horse Heisman candidate. They've come up short in losses to both Arizona and Army. I know that they're at home, but I don't think UCF is going to fear the environment. I think they're going to score. I like both UCF plus 5.5 here against a 1-3 Kansas State team. And I like the UCF money line. Let's see how those unfold over the next couple of days. I've got a couple more quick hitters. Ohio State at UW, over 54.5. I don't think that UW's defense can stop Ohio State. That offense is just way, way, way too talented. I think that on the same token, UW, DeMond Williams, Jonah Coleman and company, I think that they can put some points on the board. I think Denzel Boston is a big, talented wide receiver. He had 6 for 107 and 2 touchdowns in the Apple Cup. He's got 3 scores on the year. I think even at home, the Buckeyes are going to be too much for the Huskies. Could be a closer game than I expect. I wouldn't touch the spread, but I think at home, the Huskies are going to put up some points. And if the Huskies can get to 17 to 20 points, I think that Ohio State will put up enough in that kind of 30 to 40 range that we're going to see an over of 54.5. I think it'll be close, but I think we're going to see the over. I'm curious to see how that total evolves throughout the week. LSU, number 4 LSU at number 13 Ole Miss. That's going to be an interesting one. Ole Miss is minus 1.5 at home. So not a lot of confidence that Ole Miss is actually the better team there. Look, a home game in Oxford. That's going to be a rowdy environment, but LSU looks like they have a very talented team. They're kind of back to those LSU teams that we expect to see, frankly, most years, with a lot of speed and size on offense, and then a really strong defense that's going to take the ball away. So I'm interested to see how that game unfolds. If it stays at minus 1.5, I think Ole Miss might be the play there. If it moves in LSU's favor, I think Ole Miss becomes a stronger play there. Indiana at Iowa, talked about that. Indiana's minus 6.5 at Iowa. I think Indiana's going to blow past that. In Kurt Cignetti, we trust. And then finally, the bounce back game. Tulane is currently minus 14 at home against Tulsa. Look, I was really impressed with Tulsa. Even though Oklahoma State sucks, to go into Stillwater and win for the first time since 1951 is something to be really proud about. I also think that could lead to a bit of a letdown. And on the other side, I think Tulane is going to be really hungry for a bounce back. That 45-10 loss to Ole Miss does not define them. It's not who they are. And so I expect that Tulane is going to come back and win that game by 3 touchdowns going away. Okay, so we have a prime time double. Both games kicking off 7:30 Eastern on Saturday night. These are the games that everybody's looking forward to. These could be the 2 games that shape the playoff most over the coming weeks. The first one is Oregon at Penn State. Penn State at home in a whiteout. It's going to be a night game in the dark in Happy Valley. Penn State minus 3.5. This is a Big Ten title game rematch. The Penn State backfield is Oregon's #1 focus here, especially Katron Allen. Allen bulldozed the Ducks for 14 carries, 124 yards, and a touchdown in that Big Ten title game. He averaged 8.9 yards per carry, and it actually felt like more than that every time he touched the ball. It got to the point where you wondered why they didn't give him the ball more, and they kept giving the ball to Singletary, who the Ducks did a better job of bottling up. Tyler Warren, Penn State's do-everything All-American tight end, was also a huge problem for the Ducks. He had 7 catches for 84 very timely yards, converted multiple third downs, and he was that guy that quarterback Drew Aller looked to every time he needed a big play through the air. Tyler Warren is gone. He's in Indianapolis now. He's doing a great job for the Colts. Sure, there's a lot of talent on the Penn State side of the ball, but there is no replacement for a Tyler Warren this year. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how the Ducks' revamped defensive line handles a guy like Katron Allen. You bring in a guy like Bear Alexander, transfer from USC. He has helped that Duck defensive line really gel and strengthen year over year. So excited to see that matchup. And then, of course, the Duck defensive secondary, thanks to the transfer portal with guys like Dylan Thieneman, Jaden Kennedy, the secondary is very strong. And so while I have a ton of respect for Drew Aller, I'm not sure that the Ducks are a worse team and or Penn State is a materially better team year over year than the 2 squads we saw meet up last year. I really like what we're seeing with Dante Moore. Frankly, I like Dante Moore better than Dylan Gabriel, who, obviously 3rd-round draft pick to the Cleveland Browns, playing in the NFL on a roster these days. I wish we had Evan Stewart, but I really like Decorian Moore, true freshman. Is he too young to realize the moment and just ball out? Is he going to realize the moment at some point and maybe regress a little bit? Not sure. Obviously, Tez Johnson was a huge factor in last year's Big Ten title game. He had 11 grabs for 181 yards and a touchdown. Sadiq was also a huge factor. Didn't have a lot of catches, but that hurdle for the touchdown was huge. He's playing a big role this year. So I'm liking Oregon, even on the road, even at Penn State. This is the game that Oregon has to win to maintain their place at the top of the pecking order in the playoff race. So I think that's a big one. Bama at Georgia. This is another big one, and 2 impressive trends collide. Georgia's at home, where they've won 33 straight games. Bama is 9-1 in their last 10 games against Georgia. I'm guessing most people wouldn't expect that. Georgia, obviously, an incredible program, winning multiple national championships over the last several years. Kirby Smart and his coaching staff, very highly decorated and highly respected. But Bama, 9-1, last 10 against Georgia. Last year, both teams, like this year, coming off a bye, Bama beat #2 Georgia 41-34. When you look at the coaching staffs, again, both teams coming off a bye. Kalen DeBoer, last 4 years, 3-1, coming off byes. Kirby Smart, last 4 years, 3-1, coming off byes. So something's got to give there. I think Gunnar Stockton, when you look at that Bama team, is kind of a microcosm for Bama all up. He's getting the job done, but nothing Bama has done this year has really been that impressive. They finally looked like Bama against Wisconsin, but I think given Maryland's performance, you have to scratch your head a little bit and wonder just how impressive that performance was. And it's hard not to look back to that tough opening week loss at Florida State. Georgia has been steady, if not amazing. Like I said, with Gunnar Stockton, the Tennessee win was a quality win. Some ways they were kind of lucky to pull that one out. But this is going to be a battle, and this is going to set the tone for the rest of the year in the SEC and the playoff race. Again, much more to come. It's a really exciting week in college football. Excited to track it. I'll be putting some notes up on the Substack this week, and then come Wednesday, I will have an article up with my full picks. Thank you all for tuning in, and I hope you guys all have a great week. May the betting gods be on your side.